every culture, the human voice. It's as basic as breathing. And so that connection, to me, it's one of the foremost, foundational forms of communicating. And so that is, to me, why choral music or singing is so powerful.
Welcome to Arts Engines. I am your host, Aaron Dworkin, and with us today as our guest, we have Dr. Eugene Rogers, who serves as the Director of Choirs and an Associate Professor of Conducting at the University of Michigan's School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And he is the newly appointed Artistic Director of the Washington Chorus. And if that were not enough, he's a two-time Michigan Emmy winner, 2017 Sphinx Medal of Excellence recipient. Of course, I'm very, very proud of that recognition he received. And he is a 2015 Grammy Award nominee. So Dr. Rogers, it is great to have you on the show.
Hi, Aaron. It's so good to be here with you.
So, I figured I would just delve in. I always share, people can really delve into people in their bios kind of online. So I encourage all of our viewers to do that. But one of the things and why I think the Sphinx organization, who is our co-curatorial partner, our creative partner for this show, and really wanted you to be our guest to talk about especially issues surrounding programming. You have programmed some phenomenal works, and I thought I would just start right off the bat. One of those, of course, is the 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. And I'm just wondering, especially for our viewers who may not be aware of it, could you first just kind of share what is the work? And then I kind of want to delve into the programming aspects of it.
Sure. 7 Last Words of the Unarmed is a multi-movement work originally written for tenor and bass ensemble with chamber strings and piano that basically uses the last words and correspondences of Black men or young men who were killed before their time by authority figures or police. Joel Thompson is the amazing composer of that work, and I had the real honor and privilege of working with him and championing that work. So that work really changed both of our lives in some way. And so, and honored that it has had, now I feel like it's getting its due recognition for the powerful message and work that it is.
Gotcha. So in terms of programming, what made you decide to program it, to do the work? Was it risky? And kind of keeping in mind that, a lot of our viewers are either artists who want their work programmed, or are those leaders out there who may not have taken certain programmatic risks or things like that, or may not be programming works that have certain types of social impact. So just wondering kind of your thinking as a leader in terms of why did you program it to begin with, and were there risks?
Sure. I mean, just in general, programming to me, I think the sky is the limit with programming, and we really limit ourselves when we only go to the status quo. I'm always a fan of trying to find new voices and emerging composers. Joel was only 25 then when the work came to me, and really he wrote it never to be performed. And so I have to be honest, when I first got the work, I sat on it because I wasn't sure at that time, 2015, Black Lives Matter was not as universally recognized as it is now. And so after I couldn't step away because the work spoke to me on so many levels. First and foremost, as a musical work, it was absolutely brilliant the way Joel used so many different compositional devices to set those words. But then as a man of color, African-American man, it just grabbed my heart. And I realized if I was going to program this work with a group of individuals who are not men of color, that we had to find the universal connection. And once I found that and the students were on board with that with me, I knew that we could go on that journey together. And even though some people said, why would you do this work? I just believe if you can find the commonality and the message that unites us all. And for this piece, it was loss of life. Regardless of how it happened, we all can at least agree that any life that's lost is something to be mourned, right? And so with that, we forged ahead with our students, and we framed it Love, Life, and Loss. And the response really was overwhelmingly positive. And of course, there were a few dissenters, but for the most part, it was very positive.
Awesome. And do you kind of have, you know, a set of criteria or a framework when you look? You must, of course, you know, probably get, you know, barrage of people. You should do this work. You should do that work. Do my work. Is there kind of a set of criteria or a process you go through that, for example, enabled this to happen, but that you approach really all work with?
That's a great question. You know, Aaron, the first criteria is it musically excellent? That for me, you know, if you're only trying to push an agenda, that doesn't matter, but that was never the goal. You know, so it has to have merit musically. And then what is this text? You know, this text was very specific, short and direct words, right? You know, but oftentimes, you know, say it's The Caged Bird Sings. Obviously, that text stands on its own. This text stood on its own because how can you argue with their last words of correspondences, right? It is what it is. And sometimes it is painful. Sometimes it is hopeful. Mom, I'm going to college. But the music matched the power of the text. And that's the process that I personally go through whenever I'm choosing a work, is that it first has to have that. Do they communicate those stories in a relatively succinct amount of time? I think sometimes things go on and on and on. And it's like, you know, if we had just like 5 minutes less of that music, it would be perfect. And I think that's one advice I give composers, you know, get in there and get out, you know, let people want more always. And so I have to be honest, those are probably the three. And then I have to I think about connection with my community, you know, how can I, if they're not immediately already committed and connected to this idea, this message, this work, how can I together create a message or find a theme where we all can connect audience-wise, the people who are performing? Because I think performers have to tell the truth on stage. One of the things I tell my singers is, you have, whether you believe these words or not, we have to believe that you do believe them as a performer. And I refer to it as telling the truth. And so I think we have to also be very, know that our community, our singers, the performers are able to do that, or you're able to get them to that place as well.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. So, you know, sometimes I think about, and, you know, I've spent most of my life as an instrumentalist, as a violinist, but I always have to admit that there seems to be this power or impact when I go to a choral concert. It definitely does something to me, the human voice. And I'm just wondering for you, how do you see that? And do you see kind of a difference between what you're able to do and kind of architect artistically with a chorus versus things that are done with orchestras?
Well, you know, I'm very honored you asked this question. I also would say you forgot to also mention our work together through Exegence, my baby, which is, and that group was really partially created because, to me, the stories that can be told through words. I think, you know, the music, to me, the quality of music must be the same as any orchestral repertoire, in my opinion. But the words, the stories you're able to tell, I think the connection of the eyes of the person who's performing, there's no separation really between you and that singer and the communication of those words. And think about every culture. Every culture may not have a violin or a trumpet, but every culture, the human voice, it's as basic as breathing. And so that connection, to me, it's one of the foremost, you know, foundational forms of communicating. And so that is, to me, why choral music or singing is so powerful. And if you think about a really phenomenal voice and how that one singer with training can cut over an entire orchestra, I mean, there's something very powerful about the overtones. That's above and beyond the text and the communication.
Wow, awesome. Well, of course, you mentioned Exegence, which you are the founder of, a Sphinx ensemble. And that brings me to one of my questions that I wanted to also raise with you to shift gears a little bit, which is kind of this sense of you're both an artist directly and leading ensembles, but you're also an administrator leading all of these choral activities at one of the top music schools and art schools in the country. But now you're also an entrepreneur because you're literally creating something out of nothing. And I remember when you first came with the idea of Exegence to Sphinx and to look at those partnerships. Can you talk a little about where does that come from? A lot of times people are settled at, well, I've got this, my conducting gig, I've got my teaching gig, I've got, well, why did you feel the need to create something else, and what was the purpose behind it?
Gosh, thank you. First of all, the group was completely inspired by the Sphinx mission. I mean, that you must know that. Also, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Lee Pringle and The Color of Music. That also was an inspiration. And so those two programs together, but more Sphinx, because of my long relationship with you all, I begin to see when I thought of professional choral ensembles, and we have some really phenomenal ones in the world as well as in our country, but I didn't see professional choral ensembles where there were enough people of color, in my opinion, in classical music. And I just, like Sphinx, that's just not the truth. I know that's part of what we're doing, is celebrating the power of diversity in the arts. And really, I think really just people saying that the talent's not there, the skill level's not there, it absolutely is not the case. And so I was so honored when you all agreed to embrace my idea and to partner with Exegence, because to me, everybody's not going to be at the Met. And so what about all of these talented voices who maybe won't be a solo singer at the Met? And so, but they're not necessarily working because maybe they don't have this sound or that sound. And Exegence really tries to highlight the diverse talents that really lie within our communities, not only as operatic soloists, but also gospel, R&B, folk music, you name it, from all of our communities. And so sorry it's a little long, but that's the reason I felt strongly about it.
That's awesome. And you kind of touched on another thing, which also kind of feeds into this whole programming idea, which is genre balancing, bending, those types of things. How do you look at that? Because there are some people who, feel like they're very purist, traditional, only straight classical, only this particular type. Other people are like, well, let's bring in a little gospel, let's bring in some jazz, let's bring in hip hop. How do you see that? And in your various roles, do you feel a different level of flexibility or ability to kind of explore different genres?
Well, the good news is I am working with organizations who have fully embraced who I am. Because I just believe there's only two types of music. I think it was Duke Ellington or Louis Armstrong that made that quote. I don't remember now, that there's only two types, good and bad. And I really believe that. There's only two types of music. And for me, as long as the music communicates, has message, the text is equally powerful, and if the group that you're working with is telling the truth and can perform that well, why not? And if I don't have the skill set, I'm going to bring in experts to work with me to highlight that. But I don't want to ever limit the offerings that I'm able to bring. With the Washington Chorus, we're starting a Mahogany series that will highlight the diverse voices from the Black, Latinx, and American Indian communities. And that group will be asked to sing and perform styles that maybe are not typical of a symphonic chorus. But we'll have experts in addition to what I'm able to bring. At the University of Michigan, a huge part of our training is, yes, symphonic works, but we also have a part of that also repertoire of all the other that sometimes people don't even get to, because myself and the students believe in this idea that good music is good music, regardless of the background. So that's how I feel about the repertoire range and abilities.
Awesome. You bring up students, which I think is interesting. So you have this kind of cross section where on the one hand, you're working with students, and on the other hand, you have other settings where you're working with professionals. And do you take a different approach, or do you feel like you have different responsibilities or a different role when you're leading students versus professionals?
First of all, I believe the human connection needs to be there regardless of age and regardless of situation. I think that's first and foremost, because, if people believe in you and feel like you care for them, there really is nothing they won't at least try to do. I think that goes across the board. And so probably one of the biggest differences is the amount of time, with my because I mainly teach graduate students at the University of Michigan. So they're all professionals or people, who are trying to become professionals. I have a lot of time with them, more time than probably some of them would like to have with me. But, when you're working with professional ensembles, often, especially like ours, it's a project-based ensemble. We get together for 4 or 5 days. We may be learning a whole new program, and we're out the door with performing. So the expectation of ownership of you need to come, ready to go, have your notes learned, and let's get right to the music probably is the biggest difference. But the expectation of excellence, inclusive excellence is the same. I don't care what level, even with the Washington Chorus, the excellence is excellence. And to me, it's up to the onus of the conductor to choose what's right for that community so that that excellence is achieved with human beings and their spirits being in mind.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's awesome. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I also wanted to, you talk about all of these issues, programming and everything, and I've had the opportunity to see it personally. You are so passionate about what you do and about our art form. And I'm just wondering, where does that come from initially? And the second part of that is, how do you maintain it? Because some of us, we get that initial inspiration, we fight, we try and build something or do something, but then we can't help. It kind of fades. It's just tough. But it seems like today, I see you as more passionate than any day previously, and it just seems to be an ongoing thing. So I'm curious, where does it come from and how do you sustain it?
Wow, that's a $1 million question, sustaining it. I know you want me to be succinct, so I will try. I will say, first of all, I have made my hobby my career. I mean, I love music and I love people, and I would do these jobs if there was not even a paycheck. And please don't tell my bosses this. But that, to me, when you get the chance to work with people who are interested in being together and you working with great music, I mean, that for me feeds my soul. And I could do that all day long, really, if the combination of that, and of course, having so many different venues through the Washington Chorus, Exegence, and the University of Michigan. So I feel like I get different perspectives at different ways to communicate the art form, and that also helps. And sustaining it, to be honest, Aaron, I think the way to sustain it is constantly making sure you're doing it because you love it. And when you don't love it, you need to find something else to do. And I'm committed to that. I also believe taking time to take a bike ride and have a great meal and just be with friends, that I've tried to find a little bit of heaven every day, because and that varies. Sometimes it's a podcast, sometimes it's a blog, who knows? But that is imperative. We all need a little bit of heaven every day. And that, for me, is in tandem with doing what you love, is how I hope to sustain this passion.
Wow. Dr. Eugene Rogers, you are truly one of the great arts engines who is powering human creativity in our field. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.